Throughout history, there have been people who have challenged reality and dared to imagine the world as it could be.
To the moon and to the planets beyond. I have a dream today.
Among the great visionary leaders of human history, there is a literary figure who has taught us to dream of the world as we would like it to be. It is one of the most enduring, yet ridiculous, images in all of literature. A madman tilting at windmills. Even if you haven't read his tale, you probably recognize him. He is Don Quixote de la Mancha, an impractical and reckless idealist bent on righting all the wrongs in his world. His story reads like a collection of silly skits, each adventure more outlandish than the last. On his sallies through the landscape of La Mancha, Don Quixote encounters hundreds of characters who laugh at his innocence, mock his idealism, and attempt to cure his madness. In places, Don Quixote seems nothing more than slapstick comedy. It's been called one of the funniest books ever written. But it is from the story's more profound themes of imagination and idealism that Don Quixote emerges a character worthy of 400 years of tribute.
Don Quixote is a man who lives solely on the power of his dreams, on the power of his imagination. He is capable of seeing a giant where there is only a windmill. He is capable of seeing an army where there is only a flock of sheep.
The instruction from Don Quixote is repeated everywhere in your life, over and over, with Don Quixote, who didn't realize he was saying it, but was heard by people like me as saying, well, look, try for great achievement. Keep your eyes upward.
If we were asked by someone from another world what the meaning of life is, you could just hand them Don Quixote and say, that's my defense of human life. That's what it's about.
It was early in the 17th century that people first heard the tale of a Spanish country gentleman from a village in La Mancha.
Alonso Quijano so buried himself in his books that he spent the nights reading from twilight till daybreak and the days from dawn till dark.
Y le golpeó en la cabeza. Os pide un don. Adoró los orinales. Al rey. Perdió su lanza.
And so, from little sleep and much reading, his brain dried up and he lost his wits.
The books that drove this poor man crazy were romantic tales of courage and courtly love, stories like the legend of King Arthur.
It is really in the same type of fictional world as the novels in the grocery store, the Harlequin romances. These are novels about people who are superior to us and live in a world that's superior to ours and whose fortunes are worked out in heroic conflicts and resistance and perseverance and all of that. This is the kind of embodiment that Don Quixote wants to live out.
No longer able to identify reality, Alonso Quijano steps into his literary world and becomes a knight-errant, just like those from his books of chivalry.
Siglos pasarán para que se hablen de tus grandes hazañas y victorias. Hablarán de tus hazañas, Don Quijote.
Don Quixote wants to imitate the heroes of the books of chivalry, which were all the rage in Spain and in Europe at the time, and that told these fantastic tales of great heroes who would do battle against ferocious adversaries, monsters, witches, in order to save young maidens and to succor the poor and the needy. So Don Quixote goes out in order to recreate the books he has read. He wants to be one of these heroes.
Outfitted in an ancestor's armor, the old man discards his identity and declares himself Don Quixote de la Mancha. We have come to describe this type of vaulting ambition as quixotic, full of lofty yet seemingly impractical ideals. Two New Yorkers who read the Don's adventures as children have been called quixotic because of their own idealistic endeavors. Mario Cuomo, the former governor of New York, and Curtis Sliwa, the founder of the anti-crime group the Guardian Angels, have both reflected on what we'd think if we saw Don Quixote riding down Wall Street.
Nowadays, Don Quixote in street terminology would be considered fat mad. That means good mad, titched, bugged, but moving in the right direction.
It's very much like some really bad movies you've seen in your own lifetime here. You know, somebody thinks he's Superman, and he gets a uniform, and he becomes a kind of secret hero, and does all kinds of absurd things until at the end of the story it's realized that he's Charlie Jones from around the corner. People swept away by romances. That's what Cervantes was trying to tell people.
Wanting to get every detail of his knighthood right, Don Quixote decides he must have a lady. After all, King Arthur did have his Guinevere. Because he has no real love, our knight invents Dulcinea, a princess worthy of his bravery. It is to Dulcinea that he dedicates his quest.
As our brand new adventurer jogged along, he kept talking to himself, saying, "Oh, Princess Dulcinea, remember this your loyally dutiful heart, which has suffered so much for your love." And being thus totally preoccupied, he rose so slowly that the sun might have melted his brains, if he had any.
Any knight on a quest needs a squire. So with promises of riches from the spoils of battle, Don Quixote convinces a village simpleton to join him on his salad. Sancho Panza, with his peasant wit and common sense, is the antithesis of his irrational master.
The squire was sort of like the great balancer. He was sort of like the voice of reason, you know, average, everyday kind of guy saying, boy, this guy is a little bit of a loony-kazoonie, but I'm going to see if I could ride with him, because who knows where his chariot may take us.
Sancho Panza might be the voice of reason in comparison to a madman dressed up like a knight, but that doesn't make him totally reasonable. After pledging his life to Dulcinea and securing his sidekick, Don Quixote ventures into the world to fight against injustice. This quirky pair of wanderers was the creation of a little-known war hero named Miguel de Cervantes. The history of that ingenious gentleman, Don Quixote de la Mancha, has been a bestseller for nearly 4 centuries. The book is actually 2 books, written a decade apart. But today it appears as 1,000 pages of seamless adventure.
One of the interesting points about the novel is how important it seems to be for people to find out what this novel means. There's a great difference of opinion among people, and they argue about it with a depth of emotion that leads us to wonder why it's so important.
Some people read Don Quixote for its burlesque physical humor. Others claim it is a Bible of humanity. For centuries, our greatest minds have tried to dissect Cervantes' masterpiece. Nobel laureate William Faulkner read Don Quixote once a year. Freud studied Spanish so he could read the original, leading some to believe his theory of psychoanalysis was inspired by Cervantes' illusory tales. The great Russian writer Dostoevsky called Don Quixote one of the two most beautiful figures in human history. The other was Jesus Christ. Mexican novelist Carlos Fuentes first read Don Quixote when he was just 13 years old. 2 years later, at 15, he won his first writing contest with this new, illustrated chapter of the Don's adventures. It has been his passion ever since.
It's a perpetual obsession. I read the book every year at Easter. It is my Easter reading. It has been so since I can remember. I can't live without it. It's part of my life. If I don't read Don Quixote once a year, then I'm not going to be able to write, or to breathe, or to make love, or to think even. All my emotions are somehow caught up in the magic of this book.
Though some of its humor seems, well, juvenile, Don Quixote was not written by a carefree young man. Miguel de Cervantes drew upon almost 60 years of both heroism and defeat in his own life to create the complex characters and themes in his masterpiece. He was born sometime in 1547 and spent his youth traveling the Spanish countryside with his father, travels some believe would later inspire the wanderings of his mad knight. Though he had little formal education, Cervantes had a bright intellect and the spirit of an idealist. His unwavering belief in God and country led him to abandon a promising literary career in favor of military service. In 1571, Cervantes joined 28,000 other Christian soldiers who sailed south to defend their faith against the growing threat of the Turkish Muslims. Historians have called the Battle of Lepanto the D-Day of the 16th century. Though stricken with fever, Cervantes rallied on deck and led a charge onto a Turkish galley. The Christians emerged triumphant, and Cervantes a hero. Though victorious in spirit, Cervantes suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the chest and a maimed left hand. On his return voyage to Spain, Cervantes' ship was attacked by pirates, and he was taken to Algeria and held for ransom. 4 times he dared escapes, only to endure torture because he refused to name accomplices. Each time his life was spared, his captors hoping such a courageous man would fetch a good price. After 5.5 years in slavery, Cervantes' family finally gathered the money to pay his ransom. Miguel headed home. Longing to resume the literary career he had abandoned to serve his country, Cervantes appealed to the king for help.
Cervantes returns home from captivity as a ransomed POW, and of course he comes home with the expectations that Spain would do something for him.
In spite of his military heroism, Cervantes was turned away.
We have to think of what it is like for any veteran who comes home to no benefits. We could think in terms of the Vietnam veterans who expected a little more than they got. Cervantes was given absolutely nothing.
Poor and crippled, Cervantes took a menial job as a tax collector. But with a mind more suited to fantasy than finance, he was soon arrested for irregularities in his bookkeeping. Jailed by a country he had served so well, Cervantes became disillusioned by the prospect of a failed life. His idealism began to erode.
Cervantes began life as an idealist, but Don Quixote was not written, of course, by an idealist. It's filled with dark irony. It's a book written in a great deal of pain. It is a book that's very funny also, and so the combination is strange that we would laugh and cry at the same time.
Rather than write a brooding tale about the failures in his life, Cervantes decided to spoof the folly of his idealism. And for that, he needed a fool.
Leisurely reader, what could my sterile, half-educated wit give birth to except the history of a sniveling child, withered, whining, its head stuffed with all kinds of thoughts no one else would even think of?
Cervantes gives his sniveling child the armor and the shield to play the part. But the problem is, the world doesn't want to play with it.
This guy was definitely crazy. He was flipping the script as if rewriting in every chapter some new adventure, some new acid trip.
In one memorable chapter, Don Quixote proves his bravery against an invading army.
This is the day, I tell you, when I will need to show as never before the courage of my arm, and the day on which I will work deeds to be written in the book of fame for all future ages.
Each and every time that Don Quixote would get knocked on his tuchus, it was almost like the Three Stooges. It was almost like Fat and Skinny. I mean, it was hilarious sometimes, although always to recover and come back and try again.
Whenever you see someone falling on his head, battling a windmill and cracking his head, you say how sad, you say how funny at the same time. We always laugh at people who slip on a banana peel, don't we? So there is this comedic aspect, which is very close, by the way, to the great buffoons of the silent films, to Harold Lloyd and to Buster Keaton and Chaplin and Laurel and Hardy. This kind of mishap, misadventure in which a normal man or a man of good intentions cannot cope with the realities of the everyday world and is constantly slipping, falling, and cracking his skull.
Cervantes' bawdy tales became the pulp fiction of 17th century Spain. Readers everywhere were tickled with the mad knight's follies. Cervantes' funny book was a hot commodity, but there wasn't much humor in everyday affairs. The Spain that Don Quixote captivated was in turmoil. She was the most powerful nation in the world, but Spain was squandering the riches from her New World conquests, and the lower classes suffered. As the economy faltered, the monarchy used religion to control this changing nation. At a time in Europe when the Renaissance gave rise to the dynamic ideas of Da Vinci and Galileo, Spain became mired in religious doctrine and began to purge herself of anything or anyone who did not conform. These were the days of the Spanish Inquisition.
All of a sudden, they became retrenched. They became isolationists. They became defeatist in their attitudes towards themselves. And then they began to exclude the Moors. They began to exclude the Jews. They began to exclude others of different points of view, which previous to that, they had been open-minded to.
And it is in an atmosphere of extreme intolerance, of demands for political unity, for religious dogmatism, that Cervantes finally grows up and writes Don Quixote, which is precisely the opposite of what the monarchy was demanding at that time.
Rather than have his knight venture into a world where everything follows one supreme truth, like the Catholic mandate of his age, Cervantes throws his Don into a world of contradictions, a world of multiple beliefs, languages, and classes, a world very much like our own.
He finds an enormous difference between what he has read and the reality of the world. The reality of the world is full of injustice. It is full of poverty. It is full of people who have no respect for the values Don Quixote so cherishes.
Because reality defies his expectations, Don Quixote simply imagines the world to be born out of his books of chivalry. Everywhere he goes, he begins to see things as he would have them be, rather than as they are. A knight-errant cannot stay in a humble inn, so Don Quixote makes it a castle. Psychiatrists would call Don Quixote's altering of reality his coping mechanism. Out of all of Don Quixote's peculiar adventures, there remains one episode which has captured our imaginations more than any other.
Los gigantes. Sancho, he ahí los gigantes.
Look there, Sancho Panza, and see those wild giants, with whom I intend to do battle and to kill each and all of them.
Ataca, 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 Rocinante, ataca. Bajad, cobardes, cobardes. Caballeros con mi bella Dulcinea. Viles cobardes, viles cobardes. ¿Cuándo podremos dejar que nuestra niña vencida? Prometeo. Caballeros con mi bella Dulcinea. Por mi bella Dulcinea. Viles cobardes, viles. Este caballero que se acomete. Bajad, cobardes, cobardes. Caballeros con mi bella Dulcinea. Viles cobardes, viles cobardes, viles cobardes, viles cobardes, viles cobardes.
As usual, things don't turn out the way our knight intended. But even though he ends up bruised and battered, his defeat is not what we remember about Don Quixote's joust with the windmill. Over time, the episode has been transformed into a symbol of lofty, if impractical, idealism. It's true that Don Quixote's attack on the windmills was impractical, to say the least. But many people still see his persistence as inspiring. Mario Cuomo believes that Don Quixote is telling us to pursue our dreams, even if at first they appear to be implausible.
I couldn't speak English until after I was 8 years of age. My mother and father were never educated a day in Italy or here. They were, some unkind person once said, illiterate in 2 languages. And I got to be governor of the state of New York with no friends, no money, not particularly bright either. By working hard, being lucky, being in the right place. There's no telling a guy like me that Don Quixote was crazy. Maybe he missed the windmill, you know, maybe he needed a little more time. But if you don't try, you don't succeed. If you don't try grandly, you don't succeed grandly. If you don't try to get to be governor, you don't get to be governor.
Unfortunately, most of us don't win all the time or even most of the time. So it is the fact that Don Quixote endures failure and keeps on trying that makes him a figure we can all relate to.
It is about the capacity to recover yourself from the dust where you are falling, as Don Quixote falls many times, and renew the quest, not give up, and realize that life is not easy.
If Columbus had settled for realism, he never would have set out on the voyage. If John Kennedy had settled for realism at the time he said, I want us to get to the moon, how many people in the world thought that was realistic at the time that John Kennedy said it?
Going to the moon is one thing, but there are other, more earthly endeavors which take the same commitment to an improbable goal. In the early 1980s, Curtis Sliwa's vision was to take unarmed inner-city youths and put them in the New York subways to fight crime.
Well, let's face it, people at that point, when I first began to share that idea with them, thought that I should be bound in a straitjacket and put right away in Bellevue, Creedmoor, or Kings County, because they thought that I had gone Meshuggah, that I had lost it. And I believed that this could work.
As he drew criticism, Sliwa realized that the funny book he'd read as a child could actually be a source of inspiration.
Later on, as I got my hard knocks and ended up getting tossed on my tuchus, the image of Don Quixote obviously was one that, like a scarlet letter, was attached to me, because everyone was going, that's quixotic. What do you mean quixotic? You know, like Don Quixote, you're going up against the windmills. You'll never succeed against all these odds. And it was something that I could sort of lean on and say, now I understand. Now I understand the importance of this character.
There will always be those who see Don Quixote as a buffoon or a messenger of political ideology. But today, the image that endures most is that of the idealistic dreamer. The musical, Man of La Mancha, plucks our literary dreamer out of his book and dresses him up for a night on the town.
T-shirts, posters, and programs, all available now before the performance begins.
Since 1965, Don Quixote has been entertaining audiences all over the world.
Enjoy the show.
Well, that's gucky stuff.
Today, actor Robert Goulet plays the latest Man of La Mancha.
Oh, I enjoy it. I've played so many characters in my life. This time I can let it go. I can do whatever I want. I can go a little bit over the top, which is something I usually don't do. If you do films or television, you try to hold yourself in, because if you open your eyes that wide, it's called overacting. But in this part, you can just go, you can go a little further, aha, and do strange things that you wouldn't ordinarily do. And it's accepted, because he's that kind of a man. And then I pull my hair out like this, and I become Don Quixote de la Mancha.
I am Don Quixote, the man of La Mancha.
For a knight with his banners all bravely unfurled, now hurls down his gauntlet to thee.
Dream the impossible dream.
Goulet can carry a tune a little better.
Where the brave dare not go to right.
The musical's main anthem taps into a universal human emotion, the desire to dream.
When your arms are too weary to reach the unreachable star.
Go through your ghettos. Go through areas of the world where people live on 50 cents a week, and you wonder, do they have dreams? Do they have hopes and aspirations? Of course they do. So to dream the impossible dream is their song as well. It belongs to everybody.
And the world will be better for this, that one man, scorned and covered with scars, still strove with his last ounce of courage to reach the unreachable star.
He continued to scratch out a living writing plays and short stories, but none approached the success of Don Quixote. It seemed what the public really wanted were more tales about his anachronistic madman. And they got them, but not from Cervantes. Part 2 of Don Quixote's adventures was a fake. Published under the pen name Avellaneda, the forgery degrades the characters. Sancho becomes a drunkard. Don Quixote ends up locked in a madhouse. Cervantes had been slowly working on his new adventures, but the forgery forced him to accelerate his pace. Almost a decade after the original, Cervantes published his Part 2, just 3 months after the irreverent fake.
Oh, Lord. Distinguished, or even plebeian reader, how you must be eagerly awaiting this prologue, expecting me to take revenge on, laugh at, and spit in the face of whoever wrote that second Don Quixote. But the fact is, I'm not planning to give you any such satisfaction.
Cervantes didn't need to take revenge. He simply wrote one of the best sequels of all time. Part 2 is still funny, but Cervantes has more than physical bumps and bruises in store for his mad knight. An ingenious literary technique called a novel within a novel changes everything for Don Quixote.
It is the first novel, and this is absolutely unique, in which the protagonist knows that he is being written. Sancho goes to Don Quixote and says, you know, we are in a book. Everything that happens between us is known. Even our innermost thoughts are now available to the public. That is what before only God could know is now available to anyone who can pay the cover price of the book Don Quixote.
Knowing that his reputation precedes him, Don Quixote begins a metamorphosis.
Coming back in the second part of that book, where people had already read about his exploits, he knew people were expecting him to behave in a certain manner. But now he had to tailor that, because he was still going to be Don Quixote, but not as wild, as exotic, as crazed, as possessed as he appeared to be in the beginning of the book.
So knowing that people are reading his adventures makes Don Quixote a more responsible knight-errant. Unfortunately for him, the readings don't have that same positive effect on those he encounters in Part 2. Instead of the harmless banter of Part 1, characters now encourage Don Quixote's delusions for their own amusement.
The defeats are much more painful. They're less physical, but they're more humiliating. They're more grinding. All this is designed. None of this is accidental. Cervantes has guided us painstakingly into this change of attitude.
One of the most humiliating episodes is when Don Quixote is invited to a castle by a duke and a duchess. Their objective? To laugh at his madness.
They, you could say, are an idle aristocracy without genuine purpose. They have time, money, idleness, and no purpose in life.
In the 1950s, the communist Soviet Union made a film based on the aristocrats' cruelty towards Don Quixote.
Старым благородным дураком, верующим в то, что на свете существует справедливость.
I think this is a tragic turning point in the novel, because up till then, Don Quixote could have believed that the most humble wayside inns were great palaces, and that the humblest of servant girls were princesses and duchesses. Now the dukes offer him his dreams in reality. There is a real palace, there is a real nobility, there are dukes, there are chamberlains, there is all the wealth in the world, and Don Quixote can no longer dream. What he has dreamed about is offered to him in reality.
The Duke and the Duchess convinced Don Quixote that a lady of their court has died due to her unrequited love for the noble knight.
И в самом деле вообразили, что я умерла из-за вас, Дон Старый Пень.
By staging such scenarios, the Duke and Duchess robbed Don Quixote of his ability to live by his own imagination.
This is the moment when Don Quixote begins his decline. This is the saddest book ever written, Dostoevsky said, because it is the story of a disillusionment.
Разрешите оставить замок, ваша светлость.
Он сумасшедший.
The tremendous thing about the Dukes is that they destroy uncertainty. They establish reality once more, and it is an ugly reality. It is a reality made of meanness, hypocrisy, the cult of appearances, degradation of others, hatred for those who are not like you, ridicule for those who are different. It is like a microcosm of our present-day world, full of phobias, racism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, anti-Arabism, anti-immigrant. All these things that make up the modern world, these dukes personify.
In spite of the humiliation Don Quixote endures at the castle, he continues onward to new adventures, still dedicated to his quest as a knight-errant.
But I know what it's like to be laughed at. I know what it's like to be made fun of. I know what it's like to be called a Looney Tune ready to be locked up in the loony bin. And it requires a lot of intestinal fortitude, a lot of chutzpah, a lot of, as we would say, onions, to be able to stand up and not get diverted because of that. And I think that's part of the lesson of Don Quixote.
Free from the cruelty of the Duke and Duchess's mockery, Don Quixote reflects, his words echoing Cervantes' own life.
Don Quixote felt he was once again where he truly belonged. Renewing his quest for knightly adventure made his heart soar, and turning to Sancho, he declared, "Liberty, Sancho, is one of the most precious gifts heaven has bestowed upon man. For liberty, as for honor, one can rightfully risk one's life. And on the other hand, captivity is the worst evil that can befall man."
We'd like to believe that Don Quixote rides off into the sunset to forever pursue his quest. But Cervantes did not grant his readers such a storybook ending. Soon after leaving the Duke's castle, Don Quixote encounters a character determined to destroy his illusions. Samson Carrasco claims his benevolent aim is to restore Don Quixote to sanity. To achieve the cure, Samson pretends to be a knight and challenges Don Quixote to a duel. Our feeble knight is no challenge for the younger, stronger, and saner knight of the White Moon. As the victor, the Knight of the White Moon demands that Don Quixote renounce Dulcinea as the most beautiful woman in the world.
Don Quixote says, "Will then thrust the lance home. Kill me, because I will never renounce her." So he is literally prepared to die for this non-existent woman. He's being asked to give up the very core of himself, and that he is not prepared to do. He would rather die physically than forswear that most precious part of himself.
In defeat, Don Quixote refuses to renounce Dulcinea, so the Knight of the White Moon demands that he return home and give up knight-errantry. Forced to abandon his identity, Don Quixote surrenders his madness and once again becomes the sane country gentleman, Alonso Quijano.
This is a tragedy. Here's a high idealistic knight who hits the stone wall of an uncomprehending reality and whose mission eventually ends in disaster. And he's defeated.
And everybody around him, his niece, the servants, the priest, the notary, everybody said, how wonderful, he has recovered his reason. No, it is very terrible. It is very dramatic to see Don Quixote lose his reason for being, which was to be Don Quixote de la Mancha, not Alonso Quijano.
Lost in a sanity imposed by those around him, Alonso Quijano dies. He simply cannot live without his dreams. Cervantes has brought a book which started out as a string of silly skits to the point of tragedy. After a life filled with failure, Don Quixote's death seems to signal the final destruction of his idealistic spirit.
There is Don Quixote who goes back home and says, I am Alonso Quijano. I'm a poor hidalgo, a poor squire, I'm nothing more. But there's the other Don Quixote who goes forever living in the book, who will go forever battling windmills and attacking flocks of sheep.
The demented knight, Don Quixote de la Mancha, the other personality in the persona, is indeed immortal and has escaped from the book into however many literatures, translations, imitations, however many borrowings, musical works, ballets. The spirit of Don Quixote does not die.
Since the story was first published, each generation has taken its own message from Don Quixote. Today, for many people, the knight's foolish adventures have become a lesson on the power of perception and the importance of perseverance.
I think that one of the things that is affecting us is the lack of Quixotism in the world. Not going out into the fields of La Mancha to battle windmills, that the lesson of Don Quixote is a permanent lesson of what humanity can do in order to go beyond itself, in order to reach new goals. We as men and women and children have to constantly imagine, remake the world, and not be conformed by what the world offers. This is what Don Quixote is telling us. Let us doubt a happiness that is so prefabricated, so given to us as a child receives Gerber. Let us put it in doubt. Let us be a bit more like Don Quixote.
We'll never know if Cervantes intended his Don to become such an inspirational figure. What we do know is that Cervantes, though he struggled with disillusionment in his later years, eventually returned to the idealism of his youth.
At the end of his life, Cervantes is still saying, I would rather have been at Lepanto and lost the use of my hand than be here today alive and well. I wouldn't have missed it for anything.
It seems that the same spirit that guided Don Quixote on his quest also sustained Cervantes throughout his life. At the end of his masterpiece, the author claims kinship to his creation.
Don Quixote was born only for me, as I for him. He knew how to act, and I how to write. Only we two are a unity.
Less than a year after finishing the tale of his mad knight, Miguel de Cervantes died as he had lived, well thought of, but not well cared for. He was famous throughout Europe, but his family still could not afford a headstone to mark his grave. Cervantes told us he created his tales to parody books of chivalry. But it is not the image of a silly old man falling off his horse that we've chosen to immortalize.
I am more impressed by the idea of Don Quixote as aspiring grandly than interested in being instructed by his foolishness. So I hold on to the idea of Don Quixote, not maybe as Cervantes intended me to. Cervantes was trying to teach us all not to be swept away by romance. But I like the idea of Don Quixote, the great striver, the person who was willing to try to achieve grand things, even if they're a bit improbable. That's very important to this society.
After almost 4 centuries, the mad knight from La Mancha still reminds us to question things as they are and to dream of the world as we would like it to be.